Hello, my name is Dr. Timothy Bolin, and I'm a sociology professor at Palo Verde College, and I'm here to present to you the SEL from the sociological lens. So let's go ahead and get started here. So, setting the context. So, from in sociology, we think about the importance of relationships. Essentially, we look at society through the lens of how do we better understand why people do what they do through the relationships that they form. From this perspective, the ethical foundation we could and something we could hang our hat on in sociology is a quote by Martin Buber: "Through the thou, a person becomes an I." Buber was a theologian from the 20th century who was trying to set and stage ethics through the relationships that people have. So, through the thou, a person becomes an I. Literally meaning that I cannot be me without the relationships that I have in my life. I cannot be me without you. I cannot be me without my partner. I cannot be me without my parents, my students. The people in our lives literally create who we are. So I'm going to use this relational framework to talk about my work with incarcerated students at Palo Verde College. So, when we're working in a classroom, the question we could ask ourselves is, what are students, teachers bringing with them into the classroom? And we can think about this in three layers. So here I have something that I call the relational pyramid. Starting at the base of the pyramid, we have things that are most distant from our control, or the broadest aspects of society, or the social context, all the way up to the classroom context. And in this framework, as we go up the pyramid from the base to the top, we have more control and more agency with each layer. So starting at the base layer, when we're asking ourselves what are students and teachers bringing with themselves into the classroom, the social context is the macro level, or the large level social issues that affect students and families, including teachers. So such are the big issue things such as race, class, gender, ability, and disability. How do these large systems affect what a student is bringing with them into the classroom? If you go up a layer, it's a little bit more of a local context, so I call it the community context. So what are local community specific values? So these are local belief systems, such as local or campus specific systems of religion or culture, all the way down to things such as local nuances. So in working at Victor Valley College, for instance, as a adjunct faculty member, this would be things that the student population found valuable, but also even down to the local nuances such as traffic on Bear Valley Road. So working to build relationships on these commonalities, on bigger things such as the climate on campus or local nuances and values. And finally, all the way up to the classroom context. So when we go to the classroom, we have to understand that students, teachers, everyone, we're all bringing different things with us from outside our classroom context that inform how we understand the world. So when we're asking ourselves what our students and teachers bring into the classroom, we're bringing in issues along race, gender. We're also bringing in our values from the local belief system. And it's all informing us here at the top layer in the classroom context. So while we can't control as carefully the social and community context, we don't have as much agency in changing that outside the classroom, we can affect how this is viewed in our classroom context as teachers. So as we go up the layers, we have more agency with each layer, the most control in our classroom as teachers. And we have to understand that base layers to better understand and help build our pedagogy in the classroom. So we use these contexts that we learn from students to co-create using relational knowledge, creating a classroom setting. So what does this look like in practice? So as a community college professor at Palo Verde College, we have a unique student population, about 60 to 70% incarcerated students in a mode of education called correspondence modality, which means that we do work almost entirely through the USPS mail system. And we can only assume two things. One, that students have the textbook, and two, that students have the assignments that we print out for them. Other than that, students don't have access to traditional things such as a classroom setting or the internet or different things like that. So in that relationship, I had to better understand when I was going into this setting, how do I work best with students and how do I understand them so we can build this community, build this context so the teaching practices can be improved. There's two pieces here. I'm moving towards the end, but we'll go into detail later on. The professional pen-pal relationship is what I end up concluding based on doing an analysis of these local, social, and classroom contexts. And this is consequential. We'll talk about this briefly at the end, is that the experiences that students have in these settings affect their outcomes in life. And we'll see this in things such as becoming a part of the school to prison pipeline, or the tendency for social, community, and classroom context to coincide with incarceration. So we'll see a few examples from some of the student narratives that I have where they talk about their experiences and how this may be linked with their status in incarceration. So I have several passages that are coming up here that are directly from student experiences. And what these are going to show or help illustrate is at each layer, the social up to the community, up to the classroom context, not only issues of how these things affect students in the day-to-day to help build those relationships, but also to see more broadly how each of these things are very consequential. So starting at the base layer, the social context of race and class, student 4, there's a few passages here. So when I was reintegrated in the U.S. institutions from Mexico, the children were behind in my class. I disengaged from the learning, created my own entertainment, was labeled a, quote, problem child. Even though I think public education is great for low-income families because it keeps children in a safe environment and provides them with food so they don't go hungry, there are limits to how far a non-white child can go in school. He goes on to say, I know for a fact that the high school I attended was more worried about the percentage of colored kids attending than to provide kids with the education they needed to become something more than a high school graduate. And finally, I see public institutions as such as school designed to prepare kids to become part of the labor force according to your class. The student is getting to the idea that these broad social contextual issues such as race and class greatly affect their movements in the system, their experiences in the classroom, and where they end up in society. Community context, go up a layer. The student is reflecting on the importance of education reflecting their community and saying social change in society takes place with the evolution of norms and trends currently dominating society at large. Education needs to reflect our experience outside of school in order to maintain harmony between our participation in school and society. Student getting the idea that seeing their own culture and practices reinscribed or reflected in the classroom setting is an essential part of social interaction. Finally, I have two sections, classroom context. Here's a negative one, and then I'll go into a positive one and how this classroom climate affects the context. Student 1, I remember a particular instance in which I was being disruptive in class, so much so that I got the teacher pretty upset. I told her I was sorry, but she wasn't satisfied with that and went on to tell me, sorry, you sure are sorry, sorry excuse for an individual, you're ignorant and a waste of time. The whole class grew quiet. I said nothing after that. I never went back to that class again. Went on to a second experience while I was in high school. I was underachieving so much that I mistakenly placed in a special needs class. I sat in the class and observed and was immediately struck by the kindness and patience of the teacher because it contrasted much of my normal teacher's actions so starkly. Her kindness motivated me to help these kids, so I mimicked her quiet and patient demeanor and began helping some of the kids with their work. She noticed me and had me removed from the class. I understood it wasn't a punishment. I simply did not belong in that class. Although I don't remember the teacher's name, I remember experience well enough 26 years later. Going on to show in a negative sense how a negative classroom experience can shut a student down, but also to show that a moment of kindness, though perhaps too late, can help change that trajectory. Finally, two positive experiences. In this class, you showed me that a teacher does care. It took 50 years to see that, and it changed my mind. I was going to drop because I thought you would not be able to read and see my words. Thank you for the good words, and thank you for hearing me. The second one also goes on to talk about looking for mentorship, which is another important feature in understanding how class context helps. So, results and why this is important. What I would develop from this is understanding what is a professional pen-pal relationship, overall building a teacher-student relationships, learning through context, and sharing within reason my own motivation, interests, and context. So based on what I gathered from each of these layers, the social context that the incarcerated student population were, and the roles that racism, classism, mobility, and discrimination play in a student's experience, and what that had them bring into the classroom. The local context, severe restriction and isolation, delays in grading, lockdown, and missing resources, and postal delays meant the students didn't have access to things that they needed, and adjustments had to be made to accommodate. Further, the classroom context, there literally is no classroom, isolation and missing socialization. So responding professionally with building relationships through correspondence discussion, using mentorship and career school planning and discussion of theological, philosophical, prison issues. So ideas that went beyond the sociology class and being willing to work with students in a mentorship role. Finally, these interactions are consequential, as we saw with some of the student narratives, that social, community, and classroom contexts are consequential and can have great effects on the outcomes that students experience. So collaboratively, relationally, we could be a part of the healing process. We work together to take these ideas into consideration.